The rules governing who controls the Arctic's future are no longer being written in Washington. They are being written quietly, collaboratively, and deliberately without the United States at the table. And Canada just made that reality impossible to ignore. Standing alongside senior European officials this week, Canada confirmed a long-term Arctic critical minerals and infrastructure coordination framework with the European Union and Nordic states. No threats, no drama, no ultimatums, just a clear statement of alignment. Arctic resources, Arctic infrastructure, and Arctic supply chains will be developed through multilateral cooperation, not unilateral pressure, and not under American direction. For decades, Arctic geopolitics followed an assumed hierarchy. The United States led. Allies aligned. Canada participated, Denmark administered Greenland, and European states coordinated largely through Washington's strategic lens. The Arctic was treated as an extension of American security architecture, not a shared sovereign space. That arrangement held not because it was codified, but because no one openly challenged it. That era is over. What changed wasn't a treaty violation or a military clash. What changed was trust. Over the past several years, American Arctic policy became increasingly transactional, framed around leverage, access, and control rather than partnership. Resource access was linked to political compliance. Security cooperation was increasingly conditional. Allies were expected to accept American priorities as a given, even when those priorities conflicted with their own sovereignty or long-term economic strategy. Canada watched this shift closely. Ottawa understood something early that Washington dismissed. In the Arctic, leadership is not enforced, it is granted. And once allies begin planning around you rather than with you, authority evaporates quietly, not dramatically. The Arctic is not an empty frontier. It is a densely strategic region. It contains some of the world's largest untapped reserves of rare earth elements, critical minerals essential for advanced manufacturing, defense systems, and clean energy technologies. It sits astride emerging shipping routes that will redefine global trade as ice coverage recedes, and it touches the sovereign territory of nations that are no longer willing to outsource decision-making to any single power. Canada occupies a unique position in this geography. It controls vast Arctic coastlines, it governs critical passages, it hosts deep-water ports, northern rail corridors, and indigenous communities whose consent is not symbolic but legally and politically decisive. For years, Canada allowed much of this leverage to remain underutilized, assuming alignment with American leadership was sufficient. That assumption no longer holds. Rather than confront the United States directly, Canada chose a different approach. It built alternatives. Quietly, methodically. European partnerships were deepened around infrastructure investment. Nordic states were brought into shared Arctic monitoring and logistics discussions. Supply chain coordination focused on resilience rather than dominance. At no point was the United States formally excluded, but at every step, its centrality was no longer assumed. The new Arctic Minerals Coordination Framework reflects that shift. Canadian extraction, European processing, Nordic logistics, and shared financing mechanisms, all designed to function without American intermediaries, not as retaliation, as insulation. From Europe's perspective, the logic is straightforward. Strategic dependence has become a liability. Critical minerals cannot be subject to sudden policy reversals, export controls, or political pressure. Arctic access cannot hinge on the mood of any one administration. Europe wants predictability. Canada offers it. For Washington, this represents something more uncomfortable than exclusion. It represents redundancy. In previous decades, American participation was indispensable. Bases, capital, logistics, and security guarantees made the United States the natural coordinator of Arctic activity. Today, allies are discovering that coordination is possible without centralization. and safer without coercion. This shift has strategic consequences far beyond minerals. Arctic infrastructure projects are now being designed with European standards, financing, and regulatory frameworks in mind. Shipping route planning is being discussed multilaterally, not bilaterally, with Washington. Indigenous governance structures are being integrated directly into project approvals, reducing the space for external pressure campaigns. Intelligence sharing increasingly flows through Nordic-Canadian channels, with American input treated as optional rather than foundational. None of this was announced as a break. That is what makes it effective. Power in modern geopolitics is rarely seized. It is reallocated through coordination choices. Canada did not challenge American leadership with rhetoric. It made leadership unnecessary by ensuring alternatives existed. The United States still maintains significant Arctic capabilities. Its military presence remains substantial, its technological expertise remains relevant. But leadership is not measured by capacity alone. It is measured by whether others choose to align voluntarily. Increasingly, they are not. From Ottawa's perspective, the lesson is clear. Sovereignty is not defended by confrontation. It is defended by optionality. When partners have choices, pressure loses effectiveness. When supply chains have multiple pathways, leverage collapses. This approach also reshapes Canada's domestic calculus. Arctic development is no longer framed as extraction for export under foreign terms. It is framed as nation-building, infrastructure that serves Canadian communities first, while integrating Canada into transatlantic economic systems on equal footing. European capital flows into Canadian projects without political conditionality. Indigenous participation becomes structural rather than performative. Long-term planning replaces short-term access deals. For Europe, Canada becomes something more than a resource supplier. It becomes a strategic partner capable of anchoring Arctic stability without provoking escalation. That balance, cooperation without domination, is precisely what Washington has struggled to maintain. The implications extend beyond the Arctic. Other allies are watching closely. If Canada can coordinate large-scale strategic projects without American oversight, others will follow. Not out of hostility, but out of prudence. The precedent is powerful. Alignment without dependency is possible. And once that precedent exists, it cannot be undone. The United States can object. It can criticize. It can attempt to reassert influence. But influence reclaimed through pressure rarely endures. Trust, once eroded, does not return on command. What we are witnessing is not an anti-American bloc. It is something more consequential. It is a post-assumption alliance structure, one in which American leadership is welcomed when it is constructive and bypassed when it is disruptive. Canada did not announce a new Arctic order. It simply behaved as though one already existed. Europe responded accordingly. And that is the strategic loss Washington failed to anticipate. Not exclusion by force, but obsolescence by design. The Arctic is still cooperative, still multilateral, still peaceful, but it is no longer organized around a single center of gravity. Power is distributed, decisions are shared, and leadership is earned, not inherited. Canada understood that early. Europe agreed, and together they built a framework that works whether the United States participates or not. That is what real strategic autonomy looks like. And once it takes shape, there is no mechanism to reverse it.